This is The Data Slice, hosted by the Data Science Alliance. It's where we sit down to talk all things data science, AI, and tech, any way you slice it. I'm Callan Hobbman, and joining us today is Melanie Laffin. She is a chief AI engineer at Booz Allen Hamilton, and she has in-depth knowledge of machine learning, data analytics, AI-based automation, AI ethics and bias detection, and natural language processing. A lot of things going on there that I'm so excited for you to tell us more about. I know you've developed and delivered AI, robotic, and cognitive agents in a wide range of industries and throughout civilian government agencies, which we'll dive into, what Booz Allen really is and what you do. But first off, welcome to our podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing amazing. It's beautiful weather today and I get to hang out with you. So
yeah, I know. Yeah. She doesn't actually live in San Diego, so we're excited to have you here. I was thinking, for people who might not know you, before we really dive into all of our topics today, could you maybe just tell us a little more, about you and both your current job and what kind of your path was that led you to what you're doing today?
Yeah, for sure. So I really like to describe my job as using AI to improve the American experience. So we'll talk a little bit more about that through my time with Booz. But my path, I wouldn't say it was necessarily conventional because I would never have thought that I would be here talking about what I do for work for the government. Actually, I think 21-year-old me would have been like, you sell out. And the reason I say that is because I started off life as a theoretical mathematician. And I was going to do this area called combinatorics, graph theory. That was going to be my life. I went through about half a PhD and I realized, okay, I'm really not cut out for academia. This is not really what I want to do. And in true, I like to say the true Taurus fashion, I stuck with it for another 2 years. I did, even though I knew. So, it took me a while to I wouldn't say that I even cognitively tried to find another role. I just was I just need a job. So kind of the first place that took me in and I could get a good salary for, to be perfectly blunt, I got lucky that around that time, cloud was really the hot thing. So again, we're not talking data analytics, we weren't talking data science. We certainly were talking about AI at that time. But cloud was around and we were beginning to be able to do a lot more things unlocking data. And people were starting to realize the value of collecting data. So as a result, I kind of got early on with understanding inefficient business processes and just using whatever I could, whatever tool I had at my disposal, which a lot of times ended up being early stage NLP, natural language processing, to frankly automate inefficient business processes. And it's probably going to be to the surprise of no one. Those are extremely prevalent no matter where you go. So kind of started there and here I am today doing that.
Yeah. So could you talk a little more about your company, Booz Allen Hamilton? I know I kind of touched on it and you did a little bit, it's government.
Sure.
Could you kind of explain what that means?
Sure. So Booz Allen Hamilton is, broadly, we mainly are government contractors, how people know us. We are the #1 provider of AI services to the federal government, and I'm very proud of that fact. I've been there for a few years, and I've been in the AI group, so I can kind of be help build that up. So what we do is, and I kind of think about it in the government in 3 different sectors. There's the intelligence group, which I've never been a part of, and I have no idea what they do, and even if I did, I wouldn't talk about it. Then there's defense, which I think most people probably associate us with the defense, given our previous, kind of before AI kind of picked up and the relationships we have, the work that we've done. And then of course there's everything else, which is really civilian sector. My main focus has been in the civilian sector. I really only worked there. And in particular, the last few years in our health account where I work with Veterans Affairs. During that time, I've had a lot of opportunity to understand and try to help their processes and help veterans and really connect the disparate data sources they have to drive efficiency, help drive efficiency across the organization. So
I was going to say, so it sounds like data is probably a big factor in that type of
work.
Yep.
Everything we do. And that's true for me and working on health agencies across DoD. It's really being able to connect different data sources, which are usually siloed, and that's not a government issue. It's prevalent, whatever industry you want. Be able to connect your data and to be able to quickly analyze it and derive insights from it in a way that's human intelligible and human actionable. So there's always will be a need for that. So
definitely. Well, I know I mentioned that you don't live here. Part of why Melanie's in town is you were a wonderful guest speaker at our Women in Tech event, which happened last night. And that was, of course, all about, being female tech leaders. So when it comes to your experience, I know this was a really interesting topic that we talked about last night. So for our podcast friends who couldn't come, could you talk about your experience with the importance of gender diverse teams, and how that kind of impacts team innovation or problem solving, and how that's kind of been your experience?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, starting off, I mentioned I work with veterans, just starting with asking questions of, hey, are we making sure we're representing the female veterans in our data? And, there's times where just if you do like a random selection, you might just leave out certain groups. So just as simple as asking that question and like having that thought really comes from people being represented who are working on those solutions, making sure that our data is also representing, they're thinking of that. So the other thing that I would say is that you don't want your team to be the same person over and over and over again. You want people who bring in different experiences. And I think part of having a gender diverse team is, their path through life has been in some ways, I'm sure gender has definitely affected that, and the experiences they bring are going to just enrich your team and at least drive a good conversation of why certain solutions have to be a certain way or things that you're missing. So I know the example I always think about, and I'm sure people have mentioned before, is like, um, when seatbelts first came out, they killed women because they tested it with like the dummies or the male like models, I guess, the mannequins that basically like modeled a man. You know what I mean? And still, like, even if you go in the office, I have always heard that the like offices are set to the ideal temperature of like a man of a certain age of a certain weight. So it's like that's why all my female colleagues always have blankets. And like as some of us are returning to office, I've started to see the blankets and the cardigan culture come back. So
but it's about that representation kind of.
yeah, representation. Yeah.
Experiences.
Yeah, different experiences that make everything better for all of us. So.
Definitely. Well, I know I mentioned your title. You're a chief AI engineer,
Mhm.
and in the tech world, it oftentimes is kind of stereotypically male dominated. So, what has that been like for you to be in, a general field and also a role that maybe, historically wasn't necessarily welcoming to women at first?
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. And I still like sometimes experience that where people will like say, let's wait for like the developer, or let's wait for the engineer to join the call. And I will say like, I am the engineer.
It's me.
So it's me. It doesn't happen very often, but it still from time to time does come up. Or, if I'll go to a booth at a conference and I'm with my male colleagues, um, I will say I do AI, and they're like, "Oh, so you do design or you do like project management?" And I was like, "No, I develop." So and that kind of mindset does kind of get you at some point where maybe I overcompensate by saying, "Hey, I'm like an AI developer," like, and as I introduce myself, and I would maybe say more. Whereas, I wouldn't have said that otherwise. I just say I do AI, in a more without having to think about it type of situation. So I've noticed in my career that I either, and maybe this is like my personality, but I either am going hard left with the example of where I'm saying where I'm very adamant about like asserting kind of like even like, yeah, I'm here. Don't worry about the fact that I'm wearing colorful clothing and a pretty dress because I'm going to be better than all of you. All the way to like, I don't even know what's going on. We're just working as a team. I'm forgetting we're even human beings and we need to eat right now. So I'm like kind of like floating between the two norms all the time. But I've noticed like I kind of have had times where one has been more appropriate than the other. So
It kind of sounds like maybe there have been times where it was almost like you felt the need to alter behavior
yes.
actions kind of because you're a woman in your role.
Yeah, and I've noticed too, and I try to, and this is as I've gotten more like comfortable in my career. Um, it's always been very reactionary. Like I come into a situation never thinking about my gender really, and because I guess maybe I've just been so used to like being the only female in the room or the only woman in the room that like that's like not even a thing for me anymore. But when someone brings it up, I'm almost like I have like a strong reaction to it now because I'm so not used to it anymore. So And I'm not always like happy with that reaction. So,
Fair enough.
but we're learning. Everything's a process.
Yeah, definitely. Has there ever been a time in your career, or maybe even education, where you felt like you were really grateful that women were there, either on the team or in leadership roles, and just kind of a part of it?
Yeah. So I have to give like a shout out to like my direct manager, because she I've always had like male managers before. Um and for better or worse, I think she just understands what it is to be a fiery first generation immigrant daughter. And so there are times that maybe I come off a little too strong, or I'm a little too talkative or something like that. And the way that she understands what my intention was, and that I was not, it never was malicious. I wasn't trying to overcome anything. I genuinely was trying to move the needle and make things better. Having that defense in my corner I've always been very grateful to that. And I've had a lot of good, like, going beyond just that one person, I've had a lot of role models that I can look up to. It's a lot easier to not be the first person that does something. So it's really nice to see, like our previous chief technology officer at Booz Allen, Susan Penfield, who's now retired. Like I could see myself in her. I could see myself being someone like that one day. Whereas in my wildest dreams previously in my life, there was no way I would have thought I would could even think about being a chief technology officer of some huge company. So, but then I met her and I was like, this is possible. It's not so far off.
Yeah.
So
would you say for younger women, or maybe especially if they're students, would you recommend kind of finding those people, kind of role models or mentors to kind of look up to?
Yes. Definitely like role models, mentors. I would say that there's like two types that you have. You have the type that are kind of like almost like a celebrity status, where you know who they are, you follow them, like you see what they're doing maybe on LinkedIn, things like that. But then you have the type that are like personally in your life. And this is something I really advocate to have more of, like almost like how you're picking a friend. You know what I mean? It's meaningful both ways around. So like when I'm looking for a mentor or someone, they come to me to be mentored, it's a two-way street, right? Like I'm not going to be the only one giving. I want to learn from you as well. If I'm mentoring you in particular, and it just has to feel right, and you can't force it. And sometimes it happens at really random times too. You don't expect that. Like I don't walk into a room expecting to find a mentor, and then 5 years down the road, here I am with one.
Yeah. So. Do you have tips for people reaching out, especially if it's kind of a cold call, or there's not a prior connection?
Right. So that's really tough. And the first thing I want to say is I commend you for trying, because it is very hard. My advice is that to the extent you can, try to make real world connections. It's a lot, still to this day, I think humans are social creatures. And it's a lot easier for leaders and people to remember you if I've met you in like a 3D space.
Right.
So, sending that first email cold, it feels a lot different when you're following up from meeting someone in person. So I would still prioritize like connections that you can make in person. And granted, that's hard because we're like geographically dispersed. But, again, going back to the idea that mentors are kind of like finding a friendship, you really want to build a true and sincere connection. So that's what I've noticed works the best, for better or worse. We're still here. We don't have our like 3D avatars yet.
Yeah. So it sounds like maybe seek out those in-person opportunities a little more.
Yeah. Don't be afraid to do that.
You can come to DSA events.
Exactly. That was an amazing one last night.
And there'll be more. Well, I know you mentioned earlier when we were talking about the importance of representation, you mentioned the literal data that you work with. So kind of diving into the technical side of things, how have you seen that, the importance of that, of, making sure the data that you work with is, kind of fair and representative?
Right. So the first thing that pops in my head is one of my favorite projects that I've ever done. Booz Allen did a pro bono project with the Smithsonian Institute. In that project, what we did was we looked at Smithsonian records. They're open to anyone. You can look at Smithsonian annual reports, which, let me tell you, so fascinating, about who donated different things in 90.
Mm.
But literally from 1880 all the way up to 1960, we looked at every name that was in an annual report, and we went through a number of their collections data as well. And all we were trying to do, it was a simple mission, was find the women, find people who were likely the women, and see were they connected to each other, who were they connected to, what have they done. And we found so many people that had been unaccredited, or were accredited through like maybe their husband's name. So that for me was one of the first things that really opened my eyes to, they have a wealth of data that's open to everyone. It's kind of the dream. And even then we were not aware of like what the in this case, like what the strong gender bias is because of the way history was written for like male researchers.
Hmm.
So it was cool because we were able to like bring back some history and
Yeah.
like set the record straight in some ways.
Yeah, definitely. That's so interesting. That's such a good example of data being, accurate, representative, all of that,
Right.
fair.
Well, just looking at it in a different way.
Yeah, definitely.
And enabled through the technology we have available today to us. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Well, with data being representative, especially with your work, I know you mentioned with veterans, have you ever had a moment where you felt like the data, where you felt really good about the data, and it felt like, okay, this is the positive impact that using data responsibly can really have on people?
Yes. So we've had a couple times where we've been able to maybe like deep dive into not just at Veterans Affairs, but other civilian agencies. We've been able to deep dive into like some kind of service that was provided for broadly civilian, like a civilian agency, and have we felt good about the data. Like mathematically speaking, it was great. But then if you just stop and take a look, are we missing a specific demographic that receives these services? There's been times where it's like, whoops, like there are actually no women in this data set. Or a common one I actually see is there's no Indigenous or Native American in this data set. And in particular, I mentioned I work in a health setting. How does that change the result? Like, does that particular subgroup deviate from what you would expect? And I don't want to use the words, I'm going to use the word standard for a data set, not like standard as far as a person, or like the average for that data set. And as a result, how does it change the service that the government is providing? And there's been a couple of times where we actually had to relook at the policy of how things were getting either organized or how studies were conducted to make sure they included, in particular, women, because they just were underrepresented in the data set.
I know you mentioned policy, and that makes me think of, AI governance is a big topic these days. And you obviously use data and AI a lot. So how have you in your career and your kind of education too seen AI policy and the conversations around it kind of change and grow over the years?
Right. So I will say, like, when I first started, I wouldn't have known what AI policy meant. I actually probably would have assumed it was some sort of like role in cloud. Like it was that some AI person was doing that. And then I saw it evolve more into what something I would say a project manager would be interested in. It was more of like a risk assessment. Yeah, I think that was the first stage where I really saw it as more like risk assessment of what bad can this AI do, and how do we mitigate these risks. And then I want to say in the last few years, it's really grown past project managers and become the job of everyone involved in an AI solution to look for where are we having mathematical biases, demographic biases, how are these biases impacting our solution, who is responsible for if something negative happens as a result of this model. This really has blown up into everyone involved with the AI product or solution. Developers, obviously, we have now tools and research to help us do things like identify disparate impact. Designers think about things of kind of we were talking about earlier, like how is this impacting different groups? Is this in line with policies for different organizations that we have to work with? For example, like NIST has a number of has like an AI, like a safe AI framework. And I work with Veterans Affairs again. They have their own framework for how to safely apply AI to veterans. And so these are all things that we're thinking about. And from a sense, not just of like, oh, we have to do it to check the box, but genuinely, we want to make sure that our AI products are safe.
Right.
And the concept of safe AI, I would say I have not heard those words until like the last few years. So it really is, I think, indicative of showing how much AI is prevalent in our lives and how much people are thinking about, can it hurt us? Whereas like 10 years ago, I think you were just using it to drive ROI, to be honest. So
is there a certain direction that you kind of see the conversation going? I know it's a global topic, but any trends you're kind of seeing?
Yes, I see things go one of two ways right now, which, you know, I'm sure someone who knows and studies policy a lot better than me is like, this is a natural path. But we're at a crossroads, in my opinion, right now, where we're either going to have more governance, more regulation, more paperwork, more check boxes to make sure our AI is safe, or we're going to go looser, where it's like maybe we'll have some loose tenets of things people have to do, and we'll kind of let, for better or worse, the market decide whether or not the product is safe enough to use. So either we'll front load it and like do the best we can to put out a safe product, or if something comes out with our looser set of guidelines, you know, kind of faster potentially to get to market, will the court of public domain say no? So, which to be honest, they could do in the first case as well, but I think leaning more towards that in the second case. So interesting to see which way we go.
Yeah, it's a very we'll see type.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah.
Do you have advice for people who are maybe entering their careers or earlier in their careers, who maybe, I think it can feel maybe overwhelming sometimes, you know, to try to stay up to date with the way this is all changing. So do you have advice for people newer to the industry for just kind of entering and staying on top of all of that?
Oh, 100%. So these are the things I would have needed to hear. So I was like straight A student. Like I always wanted to avoid like uncomfortable situations, and I just wanted to have a good job. Like I just wanted all of that. So the truth of it is, no one knows what they're doing. No one knows what's coming next, and we're all just doing the best we can on the different days that we have. So, you know, you're not behind. Like, don't look around and think like, oh, like this person's doing X, this person's doing Y, I'm behind because I'm not doing Z. Everyone's figuring it out. You know what I mean? There's no like, by this age, I have to have that. That's like the first piece of advice that I want to say is like, you know, there's so much more randomness, I'm sorry to say, in life than any of us really want, especially those of us who do data science. So, and you know, I will say that if you had told me that in my early career, I probably wouldn't have listened anyway, because I'd be like, sure, maybe because you can't figure it out. So,
that's a you problem.
Yeah, that's a you problem. So, well, I could tell you I've been trying for the last 10 years and I still haven't. So, the next thing I want to say is the pace of innovation right now is extremely high. And for me as well, someone who's like an active practitioner in this field, and I have been a practitioner in this field for a long time, there's a lot of noise. So, you know, I read the headlines, I keep an eye on like how the different models are performing. I keep an eye on like different use cases that might be like out, publicly known, and in particular use cases that, maybe aren't working so well. But otherwise, you know, it's the type of thing where if it's really that important, I'll hear it a few times. You know what I mean? It's impossible to keep up with every little thing. So my advice in general working with AI is, you know, AI existing in a black box. There's some researchers who do that, obviously. If that's your passion, that's awesome. For me, and I think for the vast majority of us, it's usually you have to combine AI with something. So like for me right now, it is like working with civilian governments and understanding their processes. In particular, right now, I'm working with veterans, and understanding how I can apply AI to make their life better. You know, if you have some sort of, well, let me just say this too, like 10 years ago, I would never have known I would have done this. Like, this is not like I like actively sought out to this. It just was like luck and timing and things like that. And I will say it's one of the most rewarding things I've ever done in my life. And I would not have chosen it for myself given the option. Let me put it that way. I probably would have been like, I want to do AI and study how it affects dogs or something like that. Fair. So I would have picked, you know, something I was passionate about. So I will say you'd be surprised like how passion creeps up on you. So, but the overall thing that I'm trying to say is like, be open to combining AI with something that you do care about and understanding, what are your principles? What are things that drive you? One of the things we were talking about at that amazing event you guys had last night was the long and the short of it is you have to wake up and do this every day for a long time. And like, you need to find something that motivates you after a great weekend on a Monday morning.
Yep.
And for me, that is getting up and knowing that I am helping people get benefits faster. You know what I mean? Like someone has to do it. I'm like, "Ugh, I can't just be behind on that."
Yeah.
And this is a marathon, not a sprint. So my big advice is really go back to your gut and listen to your gut and don't force things because you're going to be in this for a while. Be open to new ideas. You never know what's going to lead you to something that will make you super happy. So
yeah, that's so awesome to hear. You're a good example of trust the process in a way too. It all worked out in a way.
It was really hard for me to trust the process, and there was times I didn't, and it didn't work out for me. I'll be honest with you. So,
but we made it.
We made it. Yeah.
Well, like you said, there's so much going on all the time. Are there any, trends or innovations, either in data science or AI, or kind of just the tech world in general, that you're especially excited about or kind of keeping an eye on?
Yeah, for sure. So the one that I would be totally amiss of not saying, and I know a lot of people are looking into this as well, is using agentic systems. So to back up a little bit, everyone knows about ChatGPT, Claude, all these like LLMs. Kind of the next step of being able to use these large language models is having different, we call them agents, do things for you, for lack of a better term. So now, and in particular for me, as I'm looking to automate processes, I want to be able to have someone intelligently or a system intelligently work through things, or maybe a complex benefits process, and come up with a decision that would take a human a long amount of time to do, for a human at the end to say, yes, I agree with this, or no, I don't. Again, we're looking for efficiencies. We're looking to get benefits faster, in my case, to veterans. And using something like that really is a game changer. And, also personally, I just hate inefficient systems. So like, if I can have a robot do most things for me, I will absolutely offload it, so.
So just kind of the tool it's really becoming more and more.
100%. Yeah, 100%.
Definitely. Are there any, I know there is some fear, associated with AI and things like that. Are there any, conflicts or anything like that you're keeping an eye on as well, that, or conversations you think that we still need to be having to ensure that it is a positive tool? Right.
So, again, at the amazing event we had last night, one of the things we were talking about was to not lose sight of what the end goal is. So again, like if you're working with benefits, one of the most efficient ways to handle benefits is not to do them at all. Like, but what then happens to the community who needed them? So, you really have to balance out the AI is here for humans. It's not the other way around. So at least, that's my perspective. They're here, like we create this to make life better for us. Understanding what it does, and it's going back to what it was 10 years ago, even understanding what the actual implications and what this can do for people at a large scale is something I keep a very close eye on. And unfortunately, sometimes I think back to different other policies, things like OSHA, it's not policies, but like OSHA and NIST. Sometimes these things are written in blood. And I'm hoping that does not become the case for AI, where something so horrific happens that we have to create governance that it never happens again. One thing I'm also really tracking is how much, what is truth? You know what I mean? What are facts nowadays in this time where, it really is hard to distinguish AI generated photos sometimes and like fake news and things like that. It's getting harder to corroborate truth, and that's something that I also am very concerned about with AI. And just maybe even, it become generational, like where I am at this point in history, my brain cannot distinguish what an AI creates versus reality sometimes. And it's getting harder and harder. So that's something I'm very concerned about as well. Like beyond my job, just like in my day to day of like when I start looking up things on the internet, what am I actually looking at? And is it correct?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Do you have advice for people, whether they're in this field or not? Just advice for kind of handling that, because that is, especially like you said, Gen AI or fake news or anything, being created with AI, it can feel, just scary to know that that's becoming more and more of a thing. So do you have advice for kind of navigating that, or maybe educating ourselves a little more?
yeah. So, this is actually funny because the advice I'm about to give, I actually grew up with because my family came from a communist country. And the advice there was they never trusted anything that came from the news. And it's kind of dark, but if you come in with that perspective of someone's wrong and you want to see where they're wrong, it makes you much more of a critical thinker of what you're looking at. So when we had like deep fakes, Gen AI, like all these things that started coming around, I feel like I still feel like I'm very hesitant to understand, like it's hesitant to agree that what I'm seeing is correct, because I grew up with that perspective of always check what's in front of you. So that would actually be my advice. Just take everything as something you have to critically think about. And it takes time. Like we're used to things working on such a fast scale and just reading things and moving on. But you really should be questioning everything that you look at, even if it's written by humans, to be honest with you.
Skeptical.
Be skeptical mind. Yeah, be a skeptical hat on, it's definitely one of those things where, sometimes maybe not even trust, but definitely verify. So
that's a really good point. Like you said, whether it's for content or writing or
exactly,
really
anything, yeah,
definitely. Well, obviously, a lot has changed over in recent years. It feels like sometimes every day. And you said 10 years ago this wasn't in the same place, and of course, 10 years from now, or even a year from now, things look different. So, what is it like for you, to be so involved in this type of work and just kind of see it rapidly evolve?
So I don't think I could do anything else, like, to be honest with you. I think that if it wasn't rapidly evolving and constantly keeping like, oh, this is the new thing today, I'd probably get bored. I'm sure it's some sort of ADHD diagnosis that I should have gotten at some point that got lost. But so for me, it's nothing but exciting. I thrive on this. The way I view it is my toolbox is just getting bigger and bigger. So it's harder to find time to really deep dive and understand the actual technology sometimes. So I have like gotten into a specific area, like I'm more of an NLP person versus like vision models. But that's where I make sure I have friends who can, kind of guide me really quickly on what good vision models are. Trusted friends, let me put it that way. It's not generated AI friends. I have trusted friends that can help me out with that. But yeah, I really like my toolbox is just ever expanding with better and better tools, and that's just very exciting for me. Because again, I'm here to apply it. I'm here to apply it. My goal is how can I make the world better with AI? So when my toolbox is coming with like more like high-end tools, I'm all about it.
Well, thank you so much for telling us more about your career and your perspective. It's really helpful to hear from people like you, who are so in it, using those toolboxes. It is interesting, like you said, and a positive to see it growing so much. So we really appreciate your time, especially since you were a guest speaker not even 24 hours ago. Definitely keep an eye out for a recap of that event. And hopefully we'll have you back in San Diego, back on the podcast soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe to our channel, and share it with a friend. And don't forget, the Data Science Alliance is a 501c3 nonprofit that you can support. You can do a donation, become a member, volunteer with us, or attend our events. We have lots going on all the time here in San Diego, California. If you don't live in San Diego, though, you can still get involved. So go to our website, datasciencealliance.org. Otherwise, we'll see you here next time on The Data Slice.